Hi, I'm Sean McGowan. Many jazz guitarists have been influenced by the rich harmony and diverse textures heard in classic big band music, including recordings by Count Basie and Duke Ellington, and also the work of arrangers like Gil Evans, Oliver Nelson, and Frank Foster. In particular, legendary jazz guitarist Wes Montgomery was known for borrowing these techniques and arranging devices, including his use of octaves to add depth to melodic lines, block chords in the style of big band horn sections, and repeating chordal figures known as shout choruses. In this lesson, we'll look at some of these techniques and how to incorporate them effectively into a solo guitar context, whether in an improvised solo or a prearranged melody. Wes Montgomery wasn't the first guitarist to use octaves, but he played them with such uncanny authority and inventiveness that his name quickly became synonymous with the technique. As Montgomery was well aware, octaves are a great way to thicken up a melodic line. For the most part, Wes used two different fretting hand fingerings to play these octaves. When playing octaves on the bottom four strings, he used the index and ring fingers, muting the unplayed string by touching it gently with the index. With the muted string in the middle, there are only two possible string sets for this fingering, the sixth and fourth strings, and the fifth and third. So, the fingering needs to change slightly for octaves on the top four strings due to the tuning of a third between the G and B strings in standard tuning. So to play these, use your index and little fingers with one extra fret in between. A C major scale offers one easy way to practice moving between these two fingerings. As you play this example, feel free to use your picking hand thumb to brush down against the strings, as Montgomery did. Or you can pinch the two notes with the thumb and index or middle finger for a more traditional sound. Here's the C major scale in octaves. So in that example, I used the pinch technique. Let me play it again using a brush stroke with the thumb, a la Wes style. Big band arrangements often featured the song's melody in octaves played by contrasting instruments to add dimension and texture. Improvising lines in octaves can also add some extra presence and depth to your soloing. A 1, 2, 3. The first and sixth strings offer a natural 2-octave spread that can also be used for special effect. Here's a short melodic fragment played with this technique. In this case, you pretty much have to use the pinching technique with your right hand. A 1, 2, 3, and... In classic big band jazz, the horn section would often play the melody of a song harmonized in 4 or more parts. This technique of harmonizing a melodic line with full, dense chord voicings is sometimes referred to as using block chords. Wes Montgomery often played block chords in his improvised solos, creating an incredibly exciting finish to a 3-tiered solo that started with single note lines and then worked through octaves and finally block chords. Here's a simple G minor line with the notes on the high E string. Essentially a G minor arpeggio. And here it is again with block chords harmonizing each note in the line. In this case, the block chords are simply G minor 7 chord inversions. And again, you can choose to pluck the strings for a more traditional sound, or you can use the thumb to brush against the strings like Wes Montgomery would. Here's a G minor line harmonized with a pair of chords, G minor 7 and A minor 7. actually running up and down the scale and harmonizing the notes of the scale with G minor 7 and A minor 7 chord inversions. This works beautifully because if you were to put the chord tones of these two together, you actually have a G minor Dorian scale. G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F, G. In this case, we're just kind of moving up and down the scale. If you want to add a little flavor to the sound, you can use a chromatic approach into the G minor 7 chord. This next example approaches each G minor 7th chord by a half step with an F sharp minor 7 chord. On the way down, we're actually going to incorporate a couple of minor 6th chords, A minor 6 to G minor 6. Again, just to add a little bit of flavor to the sound. So we have F sharp minor 7 moving into G minor. Same thing. Same thing. And then on the way down, we have A minor 6 moving to G minor 6. And you can hear it has a really nice blues flavor to it. Another arranging technique that Wes Montgomery used often is known as a diminished approach. With this approach, every non-chord tone is harmonized with a diminished 7th chord. So what we're essentially doing is balancing our G minor 7th chord inversions with diminished 7th chords. A 1, 2, 3, and... This concept works with major and dominant chords as well. In our next example, we'll move through a G major scale harmonized with G6 chords. In this case, we'll count the E note as a chord tone as part of the G6, as the E is the 6th, and we'll harmonize the F sharp with the diminished 7th chord. And here's the diminished approach in a dominant 7th chord setting. In this case, we've harmonized the chord tones of G, B, D, and F with G13 chords on the first and last voicings, or G9 chords on beats 3 and 4, instead of only sticking to inversions of a G7th chord. These are just a few possibilities. There are plenty of other subtle variations that you can use to create the sound that you want. Now that you're familiar with some of the thinking behind block chords, let's try coming up with a solo line that you might play over a blues. A 1, 2, 3, and... Then, try harmonizing that line using one of these approaches to create an improvised block chord solo. A 1, 2, 3, and... Here's another variation on that same example. A 1, 2, 3, and... During solo sections, big bands often played shout choruses, repeating chordal figures, typically featuring blues inflections, that are designed to propel a soloist to the next level and in many cases invoke a down-home blues flavor. We can adapt this concept to an improvised guitar solo as well. In this next example, the octaves on beats 1 and 2 signify the question, with the moving block chords providing an answer. A 1, a 2, a 1, 2, 3, and... This next etude, Only One You, is based on the chord progression from There Will Never Be Another You, a standard recorded by just about every jazz luminary since the 1940s. Wes Montgomery recorded it twice, first in his early years with Lionel Hampton, and then later in the 1960s with the Billy Taylor Trio. Watch for the octave melodies in measures 1 through 3 and also 5 through 7, and pay particular attention to the change in fingerings near the end of measure 5. Block chords are used as chromatic approaches and also diminished approaches, as well as shout chorus figures to solidify the groove. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and... Alright, let's work through the Only One You etude 8 bars at a time. We're going to start with the very first part of the A section. Notice when you play the chords and octaves, you can choose between using Wes Montgomery's thumb technique or a more traditional plucking technique for the octaves and block chords. I'll be using both throughout the etude. We're going to keep our metronome at 100 beats per minute, and the clicks will appear on beats 2 and 4, so we'll actually set the metronome at 50. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and... Alright, let's take a look at the next 8-bar section. And again, notice how Wes Montgomery created a wonderful conversational effect by balancing block chord figures with single note lines in almost a question and answer type of format. In the second 4 bars of the next 8-bar section, we see this use of diminished approach throughout the C minor 7 chords, and then finally finishing off with a B flat minor 7 moving into the E flat 7 chord using block chord figures. 1, 2, 3, Okay, let's look at the next 8-bar section. And again, there's this wonderful contrast between block chord breaks and single note lines. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and... And now for the last 8 bars, we're going to finish this out again by using some rhythmic figures reminiscent of a shout chorus, and then wrap it up with some moving block chord figures. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and... Thanks a lot for joining me for this lesson. For more fingerstyle jazz guitar instruction, be sure to check out the rest of my fingerstyle jazz guitar essentials lessons available at acousticguitar.com. For acoustic guitar, I'm Sean McGowan.